Okay, that's recording.
Brilliant. Good afternoon, everyone, once again, and welcome to the first Directors Workshop of 2024. Now, today, our guest lecturer is Paul Ross. Paul has done a workshop for us, I want to say over 3 years ago now, and he's an end-to-end supply chain executive with a wealth of experience in leadership and supply chain across several industries, from oil and gas, food and drink, and sustainable energy. His roles have supported companies such as Kimberly-Clark, Shell, Rolls-Royce. We are extremely grateful to have him as our guest lecturer today. And over the next hour, Paul will be discussing leadership and critical leadership skills. As always, ensure that you stay muted unless we've got any questions. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end as well. So over to you, Paul, for our guest lecturer for today.
Okay, thanks, Luke. Thanks for the introduction. So the idea today, just to give you a very high level, obviously an hour is not a very long time to talk about leadership. We could spend probably weeks and months, and I'm sure as you go through your course, and it sounds like, James, you're towards the end of your course, you've done a lot of this already. So hopefully, just to give you a different perspective on it. One second. Right, here we go. So the idea today, the simple kind of title of the content today is a leadership toolkit. So some simple tools, really simple tools to help you build a high.
There we go. Sorry about that.
That's right. So we'll talk about some simple leadership stuff. I'm not expecting anything of this will be dramatically new to any of you, but might just give you a slightly different perspective, and I'll share some of my experiences over the last 30 years with you as well. So just a bit of introduction to myself. Luke's done a really nice introduction, but just to add a little bit to that. So I've been working in manufacturing supply chain for over 30 years. Really from multiple different industries, from general manufacturing, packaging, aerospace, oil and gas, consumer, pharmaceutical. So very much industry agnostic, but very much end-to-end supply chain. So anything from raw material procurement to supplier management, manufacturing, planning, logistics, customer service, the whole end-to-end. I've been working in leadership from a very early age. I think my first leadership role was when I was 20. So it's a very young age to start leadership. And the last 15 years of my career has been very much into what's called in the UK interim management. So effectively, I, through my company, support other companies and give them end-to-end supply chain knowledge and experience that they may not have or usually don't have in their organizations. So change and transformation, for example, is not a standard operating role in most businesses. So I would come in short term, help them develop a strategy and help them implement and transform. What that effectively does, because I'm not actually part of that organization, it gives me a very different perspective on leadership and management within clients. So whilst I'm working hand in hand with them, I am not there to build a career or to play politics. So it's a very subtly different viewpoint I get from client management and client leadership, and how they operate that process. But very much multiple industries for a very, very long time now. So that's a little bit about me. Don't talk any more about me. The agenda for today, again, we'll try and keep this as light as possible. I'll try and put as much of my experience into these slides as possible. We'll talk a little bit about leadership versus management. I'm sure you've talked about that through your course. I'll try and give you a slightly different perspective. I'll share some of my experience of leadership versus management. Talk about collaboration. My experience of collaboration is very variable in different organizations and can be very specific to specific management or leadership cultures, and why that doesn't happen. We've probably all talked about company values, core values. I'll talk you through my experience and my journey through core values and how it then can be linked to actually making your business more profitable, more successful. Then we'll talk about what I call unspoken critical leadership skills. So when I mean unspoken, they're skills that nobody really talks a great deal about. Some of them I've sensed that are starting to be talked about a little bit more in the last few years. But in general, they're not really talked about. And I've got a couple of 2 or 3 rules at the end, simple rules that if you kind of follow that kind of concept, can certainly help you deliver and drive self-directed world-class teams. So let's get straight into it. So leadership versus management. I'm not going to go through the slides in a huge amount of detail. I think they'll be shared with you after the event. But what I'll try and do is give you some examples and try and make these slides as real as possible. So really, and again, you'll have seen, you can Google leadership versus management, and you'll see hundreds and thousands of examples and slides and where people have compared the two together. And there's some bullet points there, but really high level. When I talk about leadership, I talk about inspiring a team, driving, facilitating that team, being open, innovative. The role of leader really is to upskill the team members, and effectively become almost redundant. As the team improves its skills, its ability, its capability, then the less the leader needs to actually involve themselves with. So there'll be a lot of obstacle clearing, a lot of education, development support, and inspiring those team members to become those self-directed members of that team, where they become more innovative, more self-directed, more empowered into the day-to-day of the role, but also driving their role and their team forward. Whereas I compare that to what we typically call management, is really management, the way I kind of see it, is a function of control. So if I think about my experiences, I've seen a lot of managers of varying capabilities and skills, and very little leaders. I'm very fortunate early in my career, I was surrounded by a couple of very good leaders. But generally my vision is I see a lot more managers than I do see a lot of leaders. And managers are really around control. It's about directing the team rather than empowering the team. A lot of it's driven by personal success rather than the success of the team. If I'm successful, then my career will be better. Where a leader really thinks if the team is successful, then it drives the business improvement, and therefore my next opportunity will come in the business. Very often, if you look at the difference between leadership's reward is based on success, and very much in management, you could talk about blame culture and really the manager being the knowledge control, if you like. So what does that really mean? So I'll give you a couple of examples from my career history, my experiences. So many years ago, I took the role of being a maintenance engineer for a global FMCG company. At that point, the company's biggest problem was safety, quality, productivity of the packaging systems and packaging. So they had a number of safety incidents, they had a number of quality complaints, and it was #1 productivity issue for the plant. I was employed to really help drive the maintenance side of it, but also given a second objective of really driving the maintenance team, but also driving the plant improvement area to that. A little after that, starting that role, the operations director changed and a new one came in, and I'd never met him before. And I'm sitting in an open office. Next thing I heard this gentleman shouting and swearing, and he said, "Who is this Paul Ross? I want to meet this Paul Ross. He's curse word. He's not doing this and he's not doing that." So I stood up and I said, "Hi, I'm Paul Ross. Nice to meet you." At that point, he then said, "This is no good. Everybody I've talked to, it's all not good enough. We need to do something better." So I'm thinking at that point, this is not a good start. Initially, my thoughts are, that wasn't very nice. He didn't even say hello to me. He's not introduced himself. First time I met him. So what am I thinking at that point? I'm thinking, I don't really trust this guy now. I don't like him. I don't trust him. I'm not sure why he's having a shouting match at me. He's certainly not got the full picture because he hasn't spoken to me about what's going on. So a week later, he then sits down to me. The first thing he said to me, recognising what he'd said the week before, he said, "First thing, I'm not going to apologise for what I said last week." And instantly I thought, well, there's another opportunity missed from a leadership perspective. So it's very much a management kind of behaviour to say, "I'm the boss, I'm going to shout at you to get all the answers that I want. Fast forward 6-9 months, same boss. I get promoted as production manager, deliver excellent results, 0 lost time injuries, quality complaints dropped by 80%, and productivity went up by 40% during that period of being a production manager. For that success, I was then given a big project. So a new product upgrade was coming. It was put on my manufacturing asset because it runs so well. And it was really an opportunity. It was really a recognition of what success I'd driven through that role as a production manager. Again, fast forward that through the whole project I was told to stay out of. Specifically told you not to be involved. Your job as a production manager. Now, previously I've been a project manager, so I know how important. I knew at that point how important it was to be involved, to own some of the decisions, to be part of it, to guide it, some of the decisions. So, that when it would eventually be picked up by myself and my team, is at least we knew what was going on and we had an ability to influence some of the decisions. Again, thinking as a project came to handover, the asset hadn't turned over, it hadn't even been switched on. But because my line manager, the same guy who shouted at me 6-9 months ago, knew the project manager, it was handed over without any handover, any idea for me about whether or not it was ready or whether I was comfortable taking it on. This became a very, very visible project throughout the business. It was really a critical product that they wanted to launch into the market. The measures, again, weren't agreed for me, so what the targets were, and it just wasn't sustainable. So cut the long story short, I'd met this guy, who'd done a good job, and had been a great opportunity. But again, because of the style of the management style being control, I had no ability to then influence it. And then all of the responsibility for that startup, of that new product on that production asset, was now my responsibility, even though I hadn't been involved in it. So the pressure came on me from lots of stakeholders from very high up. I had a plant manager sitting down. I had to sit down with him on a daily basis. I had a European operations director phoning me up on a weekly basis, wanting an update. And I'm thinking, how did I end up with this responsibility? I've not known anything about this. I've not been involved, etc., etc. And at the same time, I recognised the pressure that I was being put under. I was starting to do to my team. And it was really around them seeing, or me seeing them not being happy, not smiling, not laughing, taking longer to do things. That then affected the shift operations teams, who then became slower, who became demotivated, who, again, they started to trust less in the decisions that were being made and the efforts. And believe me, there was a lot of effort going on to try and turn the asset around at that point. And at that point, 2 or 3 months later, we were just about to start turning it around, and I was moved off sideways into another role. Ironically, it was a great career move for me personally, so it actually worked out best. But what I recognised during that time was one thing that I vowed to do was to never do that to any of my teams. So really, I'd always been driven by the way I'd been taught early in my career, was to make mistakes but be empowered and be part of that leadership team and behave in that open, empowered way, collaborative, etc., etc. So again, an example during the same role, I just moved into the role as a production manager, and the first thing that I was told by my peers is there's a thing that you had to change the size of the product on the machine, and it took about a day to do, and then it would take about 2 days, 3 days for the asset to recover back to full production. I took that back to my team, who then said, this is not the way to do it, boss. This is just going to cause absolute chaos. If we actually took more changes and made them smaller, it will be less impact. Now, this has been a complete different perspective that I was given by my peers, so the other fellow production managers. But everything that he said to me made sense. And I thought, I'm early in this job. Do I take the risk? And if it doesn't go right, I've been told this is a way not to do it. But everything that the team had told me made sense. So we moved away from small numbers of changes to more frequent changes, but making the change smaller. And that was all about the team helping me make that decision. So we did that. And instead of taking a day to do it, it took 20 minutes. Instead of taking 3 days to recover, on that same shift, we made record production. So on a day of that, we'd maybe average about 10,000 units per hour. That day we averaged 40,000. So again, that's a couple of examples where you see good leadership skills and bad management practices, where you empower your team, you believe in them, you give them that trust, and they feel now that you've respected their opinion, you've empowered their decision, and they go want to make it work and happen. So there's a couple of examples of that. A couple of other examples I'd kind of share with you again. During that same sort of environment, being a production manager, was you think about the operating teams. We'd give them a monthly target, of which they had no idea how it was set. And at the same time, I was driving expectations away from the target being 30,000 per hour to 35,000 per hour, which everybody thought it's not achievable. So we sat down with the lead operators every month before we set the targets, and we said, look, this is how we actually set the targets. And we involved them in that. And we said, this is why we take this amount of delay and this amount of efficiency because of this event and this event. We talked it through and they agreed and understood where the numbers came from. And at the end of the discussion every month, so for 8 leaders, they set their own target. And they felt empowered by doing that because they understood where the targets came from. And my job at that point was actually quite the opposite, because they would typically, 80% of the time, would have a higher target that I was comfortable with. So I'd kind of have to rein them back. But what it meant was, once they've been involved in setting that target, they now bought into that target. They believed that they knew where it came from, and they had some ownership around, I actually set that target. And they would go back to their operating team and say, this is what the target is for this month, and this is why it is. So it's no longer Paul Ross's target, it's our target. This is what we bought into. So it's kind of just a couple of examples of where leadership and just using leadership and empowering and putting a good environment, a good culture around some of the decision-making processes can really drive improved behaviours, improved business performance, and believing in your team, taking risks. And that's not to say leaders don't have to be managers sometimes, of course you do. Things like times of crisis where you have just got to be very, very fixed and clear and concise and just very much, let's talk about it, let's do it. Rather than facilitative, or if you have to, as a leader, performance manage, and that does happen sometimes. So even a leader has to make decisions. They have to be managers at times, but overall, the leader is there to inspire and to facilitate that kind of solution. Okay, so next point, we talk about collaboration. Before I kind of go on to this, one of the clients I've recently worked with was a brand acquisition from a global consumer products company to a private equity company. Now, if anybody's been involved in it, you'll know what I'm talking about here, but a brand acquisition is very much trying to set up a mature business. I think it was around about a 2 billion turnover business in 6 months, with all your systems, all your processes, transfer of people from the one business to another, be able to pay your bills, implement ERP systems, planning systems, etc. So there's an incredible amount of change that happens. And one of the things that you do during that is take the opportunity to look at your organisation and create what's called target operating models and organisation structures. Now, the benefit of doing it at that point is understanding how you want your business to operate, and also try and drive in collaboration during that organisational design, such you drive out silos. You think about most organisations are defined or evolve rather than designed. So they evolve through there's different kinds of practices, maybe not the best practices, suboptimals of practice, but they kind of evolve to address issues rather than actually designed based on good practice and good process. So what you'll often find certainly in larger organisations, silos become quite real and quite difficult to break down. And really driving collaboration is quite key and quite important. So why and how? So just if you think about collaboration and why a lot of businesses don't get collaboration right, is that very often you'll see decisions are made by individuals or individual functions. So, for example, what I mean by that, personally, from a supply chain perspective, one of the biggest frustrations for me is that somebody in finance will come along and say, this is your inventory target, and cut it. In the next 2 years, you're battling with out of stocks and service management issues. So we see a lot of decisions being made in that kind of individual silo area, where they don't understand what the decision is being made. That it effectively means it's very difficult to sustain those decisions and those solutions. The expected return often doesn't happen. So when that finance person reduces your inventory by half, your profit doesn't really go up. Why is that? Because you're not selling the product because you're out of stock. So it's understanding what impact of those decisions. And really, it doesn't drive right first time implementation because you're not involving the right people who has the right information. So really, by not collaborating, it means you make probably suboptimal decisions, more often than not. And that's not to say you have to make every decision across the whole organisation or cross-functional, but key decisions that have impact across multiple functions should be made by multiple functions. I've talked about organisation, design, silos. So just a few things to think about. So collaboration is important because it helps you improve those decisions, the quality of those decisions, to make it more sustainable, but also the implementation right first time or get more closer to that. Some keys. So a good example of where collaboration hasn't worked very well was electrical consumer products, very innovative electrical consumer products manufacturer, who are very famous worldwide, very innovative, they make lots of new stuff that we'll all recognise. They had, previous to me joining them, they asked me to come in and help them understand why their forecasting was so poor. But they had previously were doing all the right things. They had a inventory policy that was designed based on the first principles of variability, demand and supply. They had good lead times and good inventory policy, until somebody came along and said, we're going to cut all your inventory back to 5 weeks. Now the product lead time was 10 weeks. So instantly, as soon as you do that, you know you're going to be out of stock. At the same time, they moved away from some of the good practices around product classification. And really what that effectively did was, it was an individual making that decision. In the European market, because it wasn't the priority market, it meant all the priority products were sent to the priority market, and the European market was out of stock for most of 6 months. So that decision had a huge impact on the profitability of that business. Why? Because an individual set a target that made that individual look particularly good, whilst the rest of the business were suffering because of that decision. So when you think about collaboration, it's something that we're all going to have to do. And I can think of one process that is probably the most transferable process from a supply. It's often seen as a supply chain process, but it's not really a business process. It's called sales and operations planning. And for those of you who know it, who've been involved in it, it's great. But it's effectively a business planning, medium-term business planning process that involves collaborative business decision-making. So historically, it might have been a finance person, or it might be a salesperson, or a marketing person, and usually the supply chain person picking up the issues at the other end. Where it moves more towards that team becoming a collaborative team. So if you think about sales always being kicked for forecast accuracy, so now the forecast accuracy is now a common objective across the whole business. So if it's not good, everybody's impacted in it. And there is a direct link between forecast and profit. And moving away from it's sales stroke marketing thing to get forecast right to it's our thing to get forecast right. And moving that decision-making process to more of what is the common objective. So the common objective for any private-owned company is profit. So that's our common objective, is to make good profitable decisions. So how do we do this? How do we move to, and I'll give you an example of changing the culture in using sales and operations planning. If you think about the biggest challenge for sales and operations planning, it's people, then it's data, then it's systems. But the big one is convincing people to move away from the old culture of I do this, I do that, you do this, you do that, to we now make decisions. And I'll give you a good example of where we got it to work eventually, but how challenging it was. So we were sitting in a room. It was a European team. We had people from all different parts of the business: Spain, Holland, Italy, you name it, from different functional backgrounds, so sales, marketing, finance, etc. We got them in a room. We start talking to them on a level playing field. This is what sales and operations planning is. This is how it works. This is what your responsibilities are. This is what the common objectives are. This is where the common measures are. And we were just about to start to convince people. And it got to the point where some people were calling other people liars. They were saying, I don't trust you, openly saying this in these meetings. So there was a lot of trust and respect that we had to build, and relationships we had to repair through that process to say, this is why these decisions were made. This is why it's important that we follow the process all the way through. Your role is to do that, and that's why it's important to do all these sort of things. Until we were just about to, as I mentioned, just about to get across that point where people start to buy into it. And the VP of the client at that point, the VP of operations, came into the meeting uninvited. I didn't even know she knew it was happening. And she sat down, and as soon as somebody stopped talking, she interrupted and said, I've got a paper from the board that says, if you don't get your forecast accuracy right, you're going to lose your bonus. And instantly, that just completely took the wind out of the room, and everybody went, oh, okay, so much for this collaboration then. Okay, thanks for that. So we spent the next 3 months repairing that damage that manager had done by trying to enforce their way of working onto the group. We eventually got them working. We got the team to collaborate. We got buy-in from the CEO, and the process was actually implemented 6 months later. We did a pilot trial, got everybody involved, and it's now working globally across that organization. And the benefits that that collaboration brought was improved decision making and also improved communication. So if you think about, it's not a supply chain decision, it's not a sales decision, it's a collaborative decision that the business now buys into and signs off. And then we communicate that decision out to both internally and externally to all the different stakeholders that need to know that decision. So it could be anything from supply constraints, or how do we improve forecast accuracy. That's all now part of that decision-making process. So that's kind of a little bit of collaboration. It doesn't happen a lot or enough. It's not just internal, but also think about external. If we think about carbon zero targets, for example, there's no individual organization or group that's ever going to achieve carbon net zero targets on their own. You're going to have to work with your customers, your suppliers, internally, across different functions to achieve it. So really looking about collaboration being a key critical strategic skill set as a leader to actually identify how do we create start to collaborate. So things about common objectives, designing roles and role descriptions and how role functions, to force them to be cross-functional, to set up cross-functional working groups, working teams, whatever you call them, with common objectives to actually deliver what is the common objective, a more profitable business. So things like product portfolio rationalization or business simplification, great opportunities to have a cross-functional team, not just for sales, marketing, finance, but also quality, R&D, legal, procurement. The more we can get people to work together, the better the decision process and the better the quality decision that comes out the other end. So just moving on to company values then. So I'll talk to you a little bit about my journey through company values, and it was a bit of a it was a journey. So as I mentioned, my step into leadership was very early in my career. And I just joined a company probably about 6 months before, and they launched a thing called World-Class Manufacturing. And with this came with 7 core values. Now, as a 20-something-year-old at that point, I didn't really understand core values. But basically, the way they launched it within the plant is they said, right, everybody of management grade, you're going to sit in this room, you're going to listen to the launch and all these presentations. Everybody's going to talk you through, and operations manager, plant manager, and we're going to have someone from the central team in America who's going to talk to you about this. We had inspirational speakers. We had somebody showing people how to chop wooden boards with their hands and all sorts of stuff. Lots and lots of fun going on. But the one thing, and at the end, when we went round the tables, the one thing I recognised is this doesn't happen you don't often have a meeting of this size in this plant. So everybody, all the operational staff will know what's going on. Well, we'll don't know what's going on. So they'll be asking, what are all these people doing in there? So when it come to our table, I was the spokesman, unfortunately. And I said, look, you know, one thing we do have to do is communicate what it is we're doing in here. So me and my big mouth, I got the job of trying to explain to the organisation what core values meant and how to implement. At that point, I didn't get it. I'll be honest, I was young, I didn't get it. I was more of the mindset of, don't worry about these values, just do the job, get a job done. So for my sins, I was also given a cross-functional team to lead up and say, right, go and implement core values. I racked my brain and I racked my brain and I racked my brain. I said, what, how do you implement a value? How do you implement safety? How do you implement integrity or honesty? How do you do that? And I struggled. So I then went around all of the senior managers with the same question. How do I do this? Where do I start? And effectively, as I went through manager by manager, it was quite clear that they didn't understand either. So I'm thinking, right, how do I do this? So what did we do? We put posters in offices, we did mouse mats, we had a screensaver, we bombarded posters everywhere, we had all of our templates rebranded with the new branding, the values and all that good stuff. But did it make a difference? Absolutely none, not a single bit. So take me forward. So, and again, I didn't understand what it was there. I was too early in my career, but I kind of bought into the fact that, yes, I want to be safe. Yes, I want to be honest. I want integrity, and these all make sense, but how do I implement it? So going forward, 10 years, 15 years, get a phone call from a headhunter who said, would you like to work for this global oil company? And I said, okay, what's the role? Sounds interesting. What's the role? He said, it's this program manager, global program management. And I'd done a similar role with the biggest competitor 2 or 3 years earlier. And I'd nailed it, I'd done it. I thought, no, it's not really my role, but you know what? If I can do it for a couple of years, do a good job, I can maybe progress through the career. So first interview came along, did that, nailed it, sounded real great. Second interview, I presented a concept of doing less delivers more, which made them scratch their heads a little bit. How does that work? It was really around prioritisation and making sure you've got resources to implement things. And then third interview, which I thought, right, that should be it now. Third interview, sat in front of the same hiring manager for the third time. I'd now met person number 7 and met person number 8 in this process. And at this point, I'm becoming a little bit tired of the process. So I've done my job now. Make a decision or not. I'm not overly upset if I don't get this job. So I travel off, go home. Day later, the recruiter calls me and says, Paul, now I'm thinking there's a decision made here. They just want you to come in for just one more interview. I said, well, that's interview number 4. All at my cost, all in my time, travelling miles away from where I lived at the time. I think, really? Can they not make up their mind from 3 interviews already of what is it they need to know? Like, look, they just want you to come in. I don't want to have a chat with you. So I sat in front of the hiring manager for the 4th time and an HR expert who then confronted me with questions effectively accusing me of being a misogynist, a racist, a homophobe, etc., etc. And at one point, towards the end, I said, right, I'm not comfortable answering any more of these questions. I'm going to have to call end of this interview, please. And at that point, I called it a day. So I'm traveling up the road. It's a Friday afternoon. I'm going to get home very late. I'm not very happy. Monday morning, get a phone call from the recruiter. Morning, Paul. Good news. You've got the job. Oh, really? Let me tell you what happened on Friday then. Oh, that didn't sound very nice. Now, bearing in mind, the recruiter only gets paid if I take the job. So that's how his model works. So he's still keen to get me in there. I'm not, because I had too many alarm bells ringing. So he says, look, let me just have a chat with him. So the day after, he set up a call with the HR expert that was in the room. And he tried to convince me what they were trying to do was to see how I reacted under pressure. And my response to that initially was, well, there's different ways to put people under pressure to see how they react, not by calling them and treating them in the manner that he did. At which point he's going round in circles trying to convince me. And at that point, I'm on the phone and I just loaded up the company's website and went on the values page. And 3 values that really stuck out from their values, their core company values was respect. And it said, it said somewhere along the lines of you should respect everyone, both internally and externally. Integrity, you should always act with integrity in all your decisions you make. And you should be honest, both internally and externally, with everybody that you work with. And I sat and read these back to him. And he said, well, what's that you're reading? I said, that's your core values. That's your company's core values. And there was a silence. And he said, but that's not, and I said, look, so did you treat me with respect? Yes or no? Did you treat me with integrity? Yes or no? Were you honest? Yes or no? And he couldn't answer that question. So effectively, cutting a long story short, did I accept that job? No. If he had followed those values, I probably would be, and I probably would not be sat here today. So again, fortunately from my perspective, they didn't follow the values. So the kind of learning that I took, that was the kind of opening point in my learning about why values were so important and why they were so critical and what they actually meant. And it wasn't about screensavers, it wasn't about mouse mats, it wasn't about templates, it wasn't about presentations and getting in a room and talking about them. It was doing them. So making decisions using your values. If that hiring manager had used those values, then I would have been working with them right now, or probably for a period of time, and I would have nailed the job and everybody happy. But by not following them, they lost probably somebody who would have been very good at that job and probably would have been even more progressive in their organisation. So when I think about linking company values to profit, I'm thinking, well, how do we use company values now? Well, we use them by using them to help us make decisions. So if I think about thinking about how do I go back and now go back to those operating teams that I talked about at the start and say, how do I communicate what these are? Well, I don't. I just say I'm going to make my decisions based on these values. And I'm going to show you how they work. And I'm going to show you they work because if you work with integrity, if you work with honesty, if you work with respect, then people will want to work with you. If you don't do that, if you come back to the operations manager that I talked about, who didn't show me any respect or integrity, do I want to work with him? No, I didn't. Do I want to work with somebody who's going to be honest? Yeah, I do. I want to work with somebody. Do I want to work with an organisation that's honest, that makes integral decisions, who puts values at the core of their decision-making process? And absolutely, I do. But not just as an employee, but as a supplier. I want to work with organisations like that. I want to work with an organisation of when something goes wrong and I pick up the phone, they don't shout at me, or they don't make my life difficult, or they don't make me feel small. I want to work with a customer who's going to be honest, who's going to tell me how much they're going to sell, how much they're not going to sell, etc., etc. So the values, using values to drive profit is by using them in your decision-making process. So again, just taking that a little bit further. So if we've taken that supplier message, if you've got a supplier that picks up the phone and says, right, customer, one of our assets is broken, it's not going to be running for a couple of months, and we're not going to be able to drive your orders for the next 10 weeks. There's 2 ways you can respond to that. One, you could say, thanks very much. Thank you for letting me know. Go away. I'll let you go away, work out what your action plan is. Let me know when you want to meet up, and you could take us through that action plan. If there's anything that we can do to help you, great. But it also does is he's going to tell, or he or she, they are going to tell you as soon as they know, so that you can then tell your customers the potential impact and start working on your plan as quickly as possible. If you respond in a negative way, don't use those values of integrity and honesty and teamwork, etc., then they probably won't tell you straight away. They'll probably wait until they've got all of those answers before you start shouting at them. So it might take a week before they communicate. So again, it's kind of using those values in a way that makes people want to work with you, who will make better decisions. Again, thinking about typical values of honesty, integrity, inclusion. It's common sense, isn't it? It's common sense that you'd want to work with a customer that uses those values. And if you make decision-making process around it, means you make better decisions, but also you engage other people who think you make better decisions and who want to work with you. So really that's driving values, and that's how to use values to help your business become more profitable, more successful. And just one other point to the bottom. Again, it's important to keep that communication. So when you're talking about values, look at where you've used them and look at where you've directly used values to the benefit of the business, i.e. you've got a new contract, or you've got a new supplier, or you've launched a new product, and you've used these values, your company values, to make the right decisions of launch times, contract content, etc., pricing. And then summarize that and see what has that impacted our bottom line, profit and loss. So that contract has saved us 10 million. And the only reason we got that contract is because these guys didn't think we were the best or the cheapest, but they thought they could trust us. And that's where the values come in. Just a quick drink. Okay. So next kind of subtopic, if you like, unspoken critical leadership skills. And the reason I use the word, it's maybe not the best word, but the unspoken bit is people don't talk about it. You generally do not hear a lot of people talking about this in role descriptions and job descriptions, in the way we look at working, when we have our performance reviews. We don't really talk about these skills a great deal, which it's surprising, but I think it's slowly, cultures of organizations are slowly starting to see this, moving away. Hopefully, we're starting to move away from management to leadership, and we're starting to recognize that, some other skills we are going to need to run it. And maybe it's unspoken in the way that we expect them to be done, but we just don't talk about it, either because we maybe think it's a weakness or it's not important. But I think it's really critical. So just going through that. So the kind of first point I'm going to make here is the kind of leadership scale circle. And you'll have seen many things similar to this. I don't think this is rocket science, but you start with empathy. Okay, so being empathetic is not a sign of weakness. Quite the opposite. I think it's a sign of strength. Being empathetic doesn't mean you always make these decisions or you always back people, but it means that you engage with people, and you engage with people on the level that they feel that they can build trust. And when people build trust with you as a leader, then you gain respect and engagement. And then that whole cycle continues. And the more empathy and more commitment you give to that individual, that group, that team, the more they begin to trust. The more trust you have, the more respect and engagement you get from them. So critical leadership skills. So I've touched on a couple of them. So empathy. I've never personally seen empathy in a job description. I've started to hear people talk about empathy a little bit, but it's very, very high level. But can you imagine working with somebody who has no empathy? Sounds like the guy I talked about, the operations guy at the start. He didn't have much empathy. Do I trust him? No. Am I engaged with him? Well, I am, because I'm professional. I want to get my job done, and I still did a very good job. But do I really want to work with this guy? No, not really. So it's empathy is really around, and it's empathetic around how you make decisions, both internally and externally. So if you think about the example I gave around being empathetic to a supplier or a customer when things are not going well. So you'd want your supplier to tell you when things are not going well, and they expect from you to be professional, just as your customers expect the same from you. So when you phone up your customer and you say, we've got a supply issue here, they don't shout and curse and swear and micromanage you. They trust you based on the fact that you've built this relationship with them. So that's one key skill. Common sense. I'm no psychologist, but this is just my perspective. I don't think we're born with common sense. I think it's a learned skill. Some of us find that skill a lot easier than others to actually see it. But common sense, if you're in a difficult position or you've got difficult decisions to be made, coming back to common sense, just make a common sense decision. Don't try and overcomplicate it. Just bring it back to common sense. What should we be doing? And again, that helps people understand. You're not trying to bamboozle them with technical jargon or anything like that. Just bring it back to common sense. Communication. Again, you'll have talked about communication, I'm sure, an incredible amount during your course. But don't be afraid to, when you communicate with people, don't be afraid to make it personal. I mean, I've sat in many clients' town hall meetings and they just go through lines and lines and lines of KPIs and metrics, and this is what the targets are. And it's just really boring, isn't it? It's just really. So you get all these communications from the corporate communication team. Where does it go? It goes into the delete box if you get around to it. So again, don't be afraid to communicate and keep it interesting, make it personal, bring something of you into your communications. Think about one-to-one communications. That's a great opportunity to drive personal relations, but also drive performance. So one-to-ones don't necessarily have to be all about driving that metric or that KPI or what's your job this week, what you're going to do, tell me what your updates are. It could be, right, let's focus this one on improving how we're going to write this report, but so that we can get it across the line, you get the credit for it, and everybody thinks it's a great report, so let's work together. So that's using one-to-one communications a little bit differently. Collaboration, so we talked about collaboration, break down silos, initially you might have to force people to work together because they're not used to it, but give common objectives, give role descriptions, change the role description to say, no, you should be working with X, Y, Z. And here's your key stakeholders, here's your inputs, your suppliers and your customers. Who should you be working with? And you know, don't be afraid to break down those silos. I'll give you a great example. I worked with a aerospace company. I was a supplier to the client I was working with, and they were miles behind on delivering to program and to after sales, so spares parts, and they were probably about £1 billion behind on orders. So I was in there trying to help them improve their supply chain, effectively saying, you're not very good, so do as I suggest, you might be a little bit better. But one thing I recognised in there was their supply chain and the procurement team were two different teams. And the procurement team actually sat in a mezzanine floor with different security access to anywhere else in the plant, which meant only certain people could get in that room, which built a huge silo between that small procurement team and the rest of the business. So when I'm going around their suppliers and the suppliers' performance was really poor, I'm saying to the procurement, well, how do you know that these are really poor? Are you helping your operations and your supply chain teams improve their performance? Well, no, because we don't know anything about it. We're not allowed to talk to the rest of the business. Maybe we need to fix that. So you think about collaboration, breaking down those internal barriers. Simplicity. I'm a great fan of keeping things simple. In fact, if you think about complexity, it's very difficult to remove complexity from an organization once it's been implemented. But always think about driving simple solutions based on first principles. So don't overly complex. That could be anything from product portfolio. I'll give you a good example of product portfolio overly complex. So a client had a market in Sweden and a market in Finland. The same base product, but different counts and different strengths in both countries. And that was driven by two individual marketeers saying, this is what my country needs, and that's what, if they'd collaborated and talked together, we'd had one product that we could sold both across both countries. So it's kind of getting that collaboration to improve the simplicity. And that simplicity is a huge benefit to your P&L. So some simple leadership rules. These are just some rules that I drive my leadership style around. So today's concession is tomorrow's standard. This is something that I learned very early in my career. guy who used to work in the quality department usually used to drum this into me: today's concessions, tomorrow's standard. And if you think about it, it's so apt not just to a quality department, but to everything we do in our business life and our personal life. If you start to accept 90%, that becomes the target. So the next time somebody does that activity, 90% is good enough next time. So this time I'm going to go to 80%. And then slowly that standard drops and drops and drops. So it's really important to, as a leader, maintain that target, that standard. Now, that's not to say you need to micromanage or overly manage, or use that process, that mindset, to alienate the person who you're trying to improve. Use it as an opportunity to upskill. So here's the standard. That's not really what I expected. But instead of me writing red pen all over your report and saying that wasn't very good, well, let's sit down together and then you can ask me, why am I saying that? I can explain why it's important. So you're really at the same time maintaining the standard, but also improving and upskilling that individual or that group. So again, today's concession, I can't underestimate how important that's been in my career, and just making sure you maintain that standard realistically throughout your career in everything you do. This one really comes from my grandparents. So my grandmother used to say this to me when I was a little kid, and I've kind of just expanded it a little bit more. So my grandmother, being a little kid, a little boy, I used to talk a lot, she used to say to me, "You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth." So in other words, stop talking as much and start listening. And I kind of thought, well, that's just as applicable in the business world as a leader. But then I thought, let's take it a step further. You've got 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth. So let's talk 20% of the time. Very often as a leader, we feel that we've got to lead a conversation. Very often as a leader or a manager, you don't listen properly. Very often if you're in a room, do you notice the body language? Are you aware of it? When somebody says something, they sit back, or they fold their arms, or they feel disengaged. And again, that's why I think it's really important when you're having meetings with people, you ask them to turn the screens on if you're having a remote meeting, and why sometimes face-to-face meetings are really important, because you can gauge, you can see the physical reactions of people, not just what they say. So it's again, if you think about a leader, you don't always have to talk. Let your team talk, but also listen to what they're saying. Look at the reaction of what they're responding to, what they're hearing, maybe not just from you. And when you do talk, make it something that is going to add value. So again, don't always think that you as a leader have to always lead a conversation. You don't. Empower your team, make them comfortable to lead conversations as well. Another simple one: treat others the same way you wish them to treat you. It seems so obvious, really, isn't it? If you're going to, it comes back to this empathy thing. If you're going to treat somebody just like the operations manager did when he shouted across me in the office and swore at me and called me and said blame me for everything that was going wrong, would you like me to do that to him? I'm pretty sure you wouldn't. If I did, I'd probably be out the door. So, treat others the same way. And it comes back to, again, talking about that example of when a supplier or a customer speaks to you, don't overreact, react in a professional and positive manner, and treat them the way you want. So it's simple, really. Showing respect, tolerance, really respecting their opinions and ways of working, and drive an environment where people feel that they can be more confident and more open. And the last one, I think it's the last one. Finish the last words. Yeah, so keep things simple. This really helps sustainability in every aspect of what sustainability is. Making sustainable decisions, sustainable solutions, and I'm sure it'll help with a sustainable environment. I've got a simple perspective on this. Life is generally quite simple. In fact, if I break down supply chain management into its common denominator, it's really simple. You buy something, you transform it, you ship it to a customer. It's really that simple. It's only until human beings get involved does life become complicated. And the more intelligent the human being, the more complex the solution they subconsciously or consciously try to implement. So it's really driving simplicity and keeping that simple. Now, certainly in the UK, when you use the word simple, it can be deemed as quite a negative word to use. Keep it simple. Well, I'm not. If I'm keeping it simple, I'm not usually using my brain much, am I? So you're asking me to be daft. No, it's actually quite difficult in a modern environment to keep things simple. So as a leader, it's really important to drive and challenge anybody who says we need more complexity, we need a complex solution. Because 9 times out of 10, you don't. A simple solution will work, it'll be easier to work, it'll be easier to maintain, be easier to communicate, and it will be more sustainable. So it's not going to fail after 6 months. And it'll be easier, more transferable from one person, one part of the organization to the other. And it'll be cheaper and probably more profitable. So just think about keeping things simple, and that will assist your sustainability. And that is effectively what I've got to talk about today. So I think at this point, Luke, I think there's a session for questions.
Perfect, thank you, Paul. We will just go to Judy just before questions, just to go through this week, and then we'll open the floor. That was fantastic. It was really good to hear your experiences. Really fascinating, and the anecdotes as well really helped many of us apply a lot of our leadership learning that we've been doing on our program. So it was really good to kind of get that aspect of it. I really enjoyed that. I've got a few questions for you, but before we do that, I'll just pass you over to Judy, who will go through the schedule this week and the questions as well that you'll be working on in your groups.
Thanks, Luke. Okay, yeah, and I'd like to echo Luke's thanks as well, Paul. I think it was really good to hear such a good summary as well of all the different rules and characteristics. You know, it really kind of put it in a very straightforward way. It's quite memorable. I think my grandmother's like yours as well. some of those things are very familiar. Okay, so this week then I'll be working with both groups. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the detail here because I think everybody has done these sessions before, so you should be quite familiar with them. Just to say, Schedule A will be this time from 9 till 11 each morning, UK time. And then Schedule B from 5 till 7 UK time. So hopefully we'll have some good sessions then. So the presentation titles, I expect we'll come back to at the end. Got any questions on those? Just to look at the notes for the presentations, these are the same as usual. So I just wanted to highlight 1 or 2 key points. So as you're aware, you do all need to attend the 3 group sessions this week, and then the presentation session at the same time next Monday. We will stick to the rules about attendance, because if people are late or if they don't turn up, that makes life very difficult for the rest of the group. So do please make sure that you are there within 15 minutes of the start time for each session. And if for any reason you're unable to be there, then or if you're struggling to get there on time, then do please make sure that you contact me, because it's really important that we know what's happening and that the group that you're in are aware of what's going on and that we can make good progress. So attendance really important, and as usual, as you know, 15-minute presentation, then we have 5 minutes for questions. I already have Paul's slides, so I'll send those out with the recording of this session. Here then are the presentation questions. I don't think either schedule will have 5 groups in, so there will be some choice in terms of which questions each group looks at. So do think about that when you're asking your questions as well now. I think that's everything that I really need to say. Anything else that you wanted me to add, Luke?
No, that's perfect. We'll just leave the
I know I've
questions up on the
gone through
screen.
that quite quickly.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think everyone has done a workshop here before.
Yeah.
If you haven't, like I say, I think everyone has.
I
So
think I
it's pretty strict.
recognised everybody's names as having been here last time. Okay, so I'll leave the questions up for the time being then, Luke, so that they're there
Yeah,
for any questions.
yeah, leave them up. Leave them up. That's fine. Okay, so yeah, I'd like to open the floor now for any questions. If you can either pop them in the chat box or feel free to raise your hand and ask the question. I've got a question for you, Paul, just regarding the presentation. I mean, you touched upon it as well. I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on, is there any skills, leadership skills that are essential for remote managers? Because I know you do a bit of remote working. That's different. Do you need different leadership skills for remote remote leadership compared to in person?
Like, absolutely. I think as a leader of people, you've got to be even more aware, use that empathy a lot more, because of the two big things I think from remote working is, A, you don't have that human contact on a daily basis with other human beings, and you sat in front of a screen for the vast majority of the day. So it can become very lonely. It can become a very lonely place. You don't have that coffee meeting at the meetings at the coffee meeting at the coffee machines. You don't have sitting in a room and physically talking and seeing the reaction from people. As I think I mentioned, I think it is important when you are having meetings online with people, you do turn your cameras on. I think there's a lot of people who don't, for whatever reason, I don't know, but I think it is important so you can gauge the reaction for people. And I think it becomes, as a leader, it's even more important you take the time out to spend both in a structured and an informal way with people who are working the majority of the time informally, such that you can engage and they can feel that level of support that they would normally feel by being in the same room as you. And just be able to put your hand up or just go around to somebody's desk and ask a question isn't as easy anymore. Everything's formalized now. So, I've got a question. All right, we'll set up a meeting and we'll talk for 50 minutes. Or you send them an instant message and say, "Are you free now?" And I'm in a meeting. Blah blah blah. So it's that informal thing that's kind of missing from kind of the modern remote way. It's things are a lot more formal. Your diary fills it a lot quicker than it did beforehand, because you'd learn a lot more by just talking to people, going up to the desk and saying, "What's happening here?" So you've got to be aware of that as a leader, definitely, and you should be structuring your time one-to-ones with them, probably definitely formally, definitely informally as well, just to make sure they're all right, they're happy, they're confident, and be aware and be available. I think that's something not just for remote, but be available for your team as well.
Yeah. Is there any kind of leadership styles or skills that you've seen become more prevalent in the last kind of few years compared to when you first started?
I think there's still a huge imbalance on leaders versus managers. That's not really changed, but I think what I do see from genuine leaders now to what they were when I first started my career is people tend to be a little bit more empathetic than they were 30 years ago. So everything was more around just being less facilitative, whereas now people are more intuitive to each other's feelings and stuff. And I think it's a skill that leaders really need to be aware of, is using that empathy. So I start to see a little bit more empathy with leaders than I have probably beforehand, and probably a bit more approachable. Yeah, that's what I'd say at this moment in time.
Perfect. Anyone got any questions? Any questions about the presentations this week? Oh my God, silence. Anyone confident enough to ask a question? No? Can we pick any topic? It depends on which schedule you're in. Titilope, it will depend. So if you're in, I think, Schedule B, where there's 3 groups, you may have to kind of come to a consensus within the 3 groups. If you're in Schedule A, I believe you'll get to choose as a group, of course, which question you want to ask.
But there will be some flexibility in Schedule B, so because there are more questions than groups. But we'll sort that out tomorrow.
How many questions you need to pick? Just one. Just one.
What we'll do tomorrow, Haya, is we'll have some time at the beginning just to finalise who's doing which question. And we'll start from the basis that group 1 is doing question 1, group 2, question 2, and so on. But if the group wants to request a different question, then we can discuss that. So I think there are 3 groups, are there, Luke?
3 groups in Schedule B, that's correct.
So questions 4 and 5 are up for, could be chosen if people want to do those. And any of the other questions, if the group that already has it wants to change, if that makes sense. It should be clearer tomorrow. But if you come along to the session with ideas about whether or not you prefer a different question from the one that is already assigned to your group, then do come along with those ideas, and I'll give you some time as a group to discuss what you want to do.
If no one's got any more questions, I've got a question. Again, I'm going to be a bit self-indulgent here, Paul. I've recently just done a project on conflict management and how conflicts can be beneficial if they're managed in the right way. And I just wanted to know if you've had any experience with that, with how conflicts can kind of uncover some improvements within processes and things like that.
Couple of examples. One is an example of a shift operator, a lead shift operator, who was incredibly aggressive. He was a big, tall chap, large chap, quite intimidating, and he was very aggressive. And he would write very aggressive notes on the shift log and stuff, and saying, using words that shouldn't have been used. And he would be at times just disinterested and such like. So it was becoming a problem, both on shift and the day support team just didn't want to work with this guy for obvious reasons. So I sat down with him a few times. The first couple of times he was just the usual obnoxious, aggressive, same person. But I didn't give up, and I thought, right, no, we're going to keep going at this. This is not normal behaviour, and you've got to start recognising it. Otherwise, we're going to go through disciplinary process, and you don't really want that. I don't want it because it's not fun for me, and you don't want it because you'll probably lose your job. So what is going on? And eventually, after about the 3rd or 4th meeting, he started to let his guard drop. And what it all came back to was he had problems in his home life, and he had work-life balance issues and stuff. So we kind of put a plan together to say, right, first off, we're going to remove you from being the team lead, and we're going to give you something else to do for a little while, take you away from that environment, let you do something else. And then we'll give you some time off to sort it out, and we'll support you in doing that. But here's what we expect in response. If we're going to invest that into you, this is what we expect in response. And it kind of worked to a point, and we have to keep reinforcing it's not just about take, it's about you've got to give as well. Otherwise, we're still going to go through this disciplinary process. And eventually he calmed down. We got him some some help as well, and he said, right, this is what, and after a few months, he said, right, I'm ready to go back on into the team. But interestingly, he said, I don't want to be the leader anymore because they don't respect me. You know, they're going to be nervous about me going back on. But we asked the team, are you happy with him going back? They said, yeah, but this is on this basis. So he went back and he became a really, because he was very knowledgeable, he became a really good support to the team after that. And what we found was that he upskilled the team because he recognised he had to repair them. So that was kind of one example of a conflict. It was really around just getting to the root cause of why he was behaving in the way it was. The second one is more from a corporate conflict perspective. You think about most organisations have conflicting objectives. So a sales objective may be it's a volumetric I need to sell X million product. It doesn't matter what it is, where to. I just got to hit my target, and that's it. Whereas if you think about then other parts of the business, so manufacturing or supply chain, we're more interested about keeping costs down. He's not interested in cost, he's not interested about forecast accuracy. So you often get conflicts of objectives and also about measures as well. So if you think about forecast accuracy is usually used, can be used, so this is how we use metrics. It can be used to kick people rather than promote better behaviours. So if you think about forecast accuracy, it's used to kick salespeople because the forecast is wrong. And their response to that, well, you're out of stock, so I'm going to kick you with the lost sales metric. And then what you then get is you've got two metrics that work completely against each other, and you've got two parts of the organisation who are now working in loggerheads. So it's a case of saying, right, well, let's change those metrics. Let's get rid of that lost sales metric, and let's change that forecast accuracy to a cross-functional forecast accuracy. So it's actually in the interest of the supply chain and manufacturing people to help salespeople get the forecast better. And then ultimately it improves the bottom line. So it's about changing that, identifying where those conflicts come up and where you've got objectives where they are in direct conflict that's going to drive it. And what that then effectively does, it drives personal conflicts between functions and people. So if you remember, I talked about the VP of operations coming in and telling everybody, if you don't get a forecast right, I'm going to drop your bonus. Well, wow, really? We're trying to break this conflict down, trying to get people to start working together, and all you've done is take us back 3 months. So it's about also promoting people to work together as well and saying, right, you've got a common objective here for this project or whatever. It's about you working together to deliver that project. So a lot of the time, particularly in larger organisations, you see people working very much in silos. And when you ask them to work together, it gives them a different perspective as well. That's why a forecast is really important, because I get it now. Whereas if they've not done that, so that kind of is different ways of managing that conflict in a less formal way, and say, go work with this person, go and find out. Or, you know, something I used to do quite a lot was spend a day in the life of early in my career and say, right, tell me what you do. Now that question can be quite an insulting question. What, you know, if you say it in the wrong way, what do you do? Well, what do you mean, what do I do? Or, you know, can you show me what you do so I can have a better appreciation? And therefore you can have a different conversation with them in their terms and that sort of stuff. So some of it's about your leader, some of it's about yourself. If you've got a conflict, driving that solution a little bit yourself. It's, you know, when it gets to a point where managers get involved, it usually gets a bit messy. So try and, if you are in a conflict situation, you know, try and break that or build that relationship and break down the barriers and obstacles. And if it is a corporate one, then speak to your boss and say, look, this is not working. Why have we got this conflicting objective? They probably won't have the solution, but at least you start to identify and talk about it.
No, I really like that idea of a day in the life of, because, you know, if you spend a day with a different department or a different team, you know, and you do that across your entire organisation, before you know it, you can really kind of comprehend all the cogs. And again, it goes back to, you can understand the values then and the culture a lot more and things like that. No, that's great. Does anyone have any questions? If not, we will end the recording there. I look forward to seeing your presentations this week. Judy, for Schedule A, I will join that session because just for the questions at the end, with it being just one group, if you just send me the, is it in your Zoom room?
It is, yeah.
Perfect, and it'll be 9 o'clock on Monday. Is that right? Have I got
Yeah,
that right?
that's right. Thanks.
Perfect.
Yeah,
That's
thanks
fine.
very much, Luke.
I'll join that then. Perfect. Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for your time today. I really enjoyed that. And yeah, if no one has any questions, we'll finish there.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Okay, thanks. I'll stop the recording then.